Right. Good evening, everybody, and you're very welcome to our Monday evening show. Thank you so much for coming along to watch it, and a big thanks to those who watch on repeat. I know a lot of you are very naughty, and you don't actually come for the allocated time, but you watch it in your droves later. So anyway, wherever you're watching this, by the way, I know we're going out on X, Getter, Rumble, YouTube, and Facebook. So quite a gamut of different locations there for you to watch this on. And yeah, you're all very welcome. Now, just before we get into the main topic of the show, lots of things that I've been talking about elsewhere. So you can check it in my Substack and my podcast and over on my social media. But what did you think of Sir Keir then? Our Sir Keir ran away from Andy Burnham, the so-called King of the North. It reminds me of the you remember in the Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Remember there was a scene, the Black Knight who fights the King Arthur, and he gets his legs cut off, but he still insists that he's never been better. Kind of reminds me of Keir Starmer a bit at the moment. So that caught my attention. Other things, did you notice the mainstream media still doesn't want to talk about Iran? Nope, doesn't want to talk about that. Too awkward. Imagine people rising up against Islam. And then, by the same token, interestingly enough, I don't know if you saw in Afghanistan, you know the way Joe Biden pulled out of Afghanistan to leave them to it? Did you see today the Taliban have, introduced human slavery and told women that they mustn't be educated? Yeah. Stories you're not going to find in the BBC, but you'll find them in my content and others as well, I'm sure. So anyway, that being said, having said all that, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk actually about a very important, quite sober topic really, and that is, and we were just talking about this off air before this started. You know, time goes by really fast, folks. Get to my age, it goes past even faster. But one of the things that we shouldn't forget, or try not to forget, is the things that were happening in end of 2020, 21, 22, the whole COVID vaccine tyranny, all of that stuff. And although, life goes on for some of us at any rate, it doesn't for others. And there are people that, and I've done shows with some of them here, who have been, their lives have been changed forever, and not really in a good way, as a consequence of taking the COVID shots. And that's one aspect of it. The other, even sadder aspect, is that people aren't here because they believed what they were told, and they went with the science, they went with the experts, and it didn't work out. So look. I'm going to introduce two people to you now. One of them you should well know because she's been on with me several times before, and her name is Jacqui Deevoy. Hello, Jacqui.
Hello, David. Thank you very much for having me on again.
Good to see you back with me, Jacqui. Great to have you back. And this time, Jacqui, we are three because, as well as yourself, I'm delighted to be joined by your colleague, Richard Cox. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for having us on.
I like the hat, by the way. That's a good fashion tip.
Cold here. I can't afford the heating and edit books at the same time, so I have to choose the hat.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's good to have the two of you here, and it's there's many things that we talk about here, but the thing, Jacqui, that I guess we first kind of met talking about way back in the day was our opposition to the whole COVID stuff, that whole psyop that was carried out back in early 2020, and then which then ran into the shots being rolled out, the jabs, the killer jabs towards the back end of 2020, and everything followed that. And obviously, just want to start off by bringing out, because I know you and Richard have been working together on a very important work, which if we can just bring it up on screen, Jed, and that is. Murdered by the state. There you go. Involuntary euthanasia in plain sight. What I love about that, Jacqui, is you're not being subtle about it, are you? You're going straight for the jugular, and why not? So, Jacqui, murdered by the state. Tell us what this is about.
Okay, you're right. Subtlety is not my strong point, but I quite like that. But I think you have to be very unsubtle when it comes to things like this, because people don't really, it doesn't register with people because it's such a horrendous, awful thing to try and get your head around. But most people just can't handle it and just dismiss it and go, I'll think about that later, or no, I'm sure that doesn't happen. There's been a terrible mistake. And if you look at that cover again, all those photos on the cover, they're not just random people. So in the book, we have 42 first-person accounts from people.
Yeah.
And these are those people's loved ones. These are the victims of involuntary euthanasia, which in actual fact is murder. It's just a euphemism, really. I mean, what else can it be? If someone is euthanized, killed against their will, then that is actual murder. And if you do get involved in any kind of involuntary euthanasia, killing another person or helping them to die or helping them to commit suicide, you get the same jail sentence as you would for premeditated murder. So, you know, it just goes to show that it is one and the same. So these poor people are the actual relatives of the people who are telling the stories in the book. And it's actually heartrending. I know the stories off by heart and read them 100 times each, but they still move you every time. Every time I read them, I still, you know, get a tear in my eye and a lump in my throat, because they're just so unbelievably awful. We've actually done an audio book as well. Richard has been doing a lot of work on that, so maybe Richard would like to tell us about the audio book, which is a different animal altogether.
Yeah, just to say on the point of subtlety, we did discuss whether there should be a question mark at the end of Murdered by the State, and we both decided that it wouldn't be right, because the people contributing to the book are not asking a question, they're not speculating, they're not wondering whether their loved ones were murdered by the state. They are direct eyewitnesses to that happening, and they're not in any doubt about that. So as much as I'm open to questioning all sorts of weird and wonderful things about the world on these kind of moral issues, we both felt it was wrong to have a question mark, and we did need to be that direct about it. Now, just to pick up on what Jacqui was saying about the audiobook, we actually have, it's not like any audiobook you've ever heard, because the contributors to the book, a lot of them recorded their own chapters, and then some of them did other chapters, and we had some actors step in for the remainder. I must say, I was skeptical that would work, just on a logistical level, what we were taking on of that. And I'm very glad that I was on the losing end of that argument, because what we got in the end was a harrowing listen. Okay, it's but you get the full emotionality and the rawness and the reality of the voices of people who witnessed their loved ones being murdered in British hospitals, and figuring out this was going on as it was going on, just a moment too late all the time, and then being left to think, what on earth just happened?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, you were saying earlier how the mainstream media haven't been talking about Iran. Well, this is another subject that they have actually turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to, because, as you know, as a journalist myself, I've been trying to pitch this story to all the mainstream papers since late 2020, and really stepped it up in early 21, March through to May, where I actually had meetings with some of the editors, and they agreed it was a huge story. Not all of them, some of them did. Some of them didn't think it was a story at all. As one editor said, well, you know, this happens all the time in hospitals and care homes. We know that they get bumped off. Where's the story? And I'm like, what? You know, because then this is the sad thing, because I was saying to a friend yesterday, a lot of the editors now, and I've got nothing against younger people, are in their 30s and 40s, and it's already become normalized to people of that age that, yeah, of course they get a little bit of a helping hand when they're over 50 or whatever, or when they're over 60, because elderly now, as we know, back in 2020, when people were going into care homes and hospitals and had DNRs, do not resuscitate orders put on them, elderly was classed in some places as over 50. So, you know.
That makes me feel good, Jacqui. That makes me feel real good. But you're right. And actually, I remember very vividly you trying to get the mainstream to be interested in this, which was a huge story, and it remains a huge story. But frankly, they buried it. They buried it just like the people buried their relatives. The same thing. They just buried it. Why do you think they buried it?
Because they were told not to run stories like that. So people have only just become aware now at the end of last year of Operation Talor, which was a police operation put into place, started in January 2020 and went through. It was supposed to end in June or July 2022, but in some places it's still carrying on. So at the time when, you know, I was trying to get these stories. And when I was going to the police about my own dad's death, which is another story, and other people were going to the police about these suspected murders in hospitals and care homes of their relatives, the police weren't interested. I mean, the police force that I spoke to, which was the Metropolitan Police, they kind of pretended to be a bit interested, but I could tell they weren't really doing anything. And when I kept I'm a bit of a dog with a bone. I kept chasing them and saying, what's happening with this? And after about 8 months of toing and froing, and the people being on holiday for long periods of time and everything, they just kind of said, oh, we've closed the case. And I said, well, you haven't investigated it. And I said, do you want a statement from me? And they said, no, because that would be hearsay, because you weren't in the room when your dad died. And I was like, what? I said, but I could give you a statement of what happened, my conversations with the paramedics, etc.
Yeah.
And they said, no, we're not interested. And I'm just writing an article for The Light, which is going in the next issue of The Light, about that very issue, how people approach the police, not just complaining about these midazolam murders as they've come to be known, but also about COVID injuries and deaths, because it was a 2-part operation. Yeah. So. And that's all coming to light now, which is pretty shocking. I mean, I kind of felt something was going on, and I think that extended to the media and extended to the hospital. They're all kind of in it together. That sounds paranoid, but when you actually see the truth, we're rightly paranoid.
But the truth of the matter is, Richard, that when people go into hospital, that's when they're at their most vulnerable. Obviously, because you wouldn't go into hospital otherwise. And then when relatives of those who have gone in entrust their loved ones to the hospital staff, I mean, then it becomes a monumental betrayal when they are indeed, as you've both pointed out, de facto euthanized by the people who pretend to be offering care. I mean, was that something that shocked you, Richard, when you sort of got to hear the stories?
I've been aware that there was the Liverpool Care Pathways, and this had gone on, and the Telegraph had written an expose from some doctors writing into them in 2008. It had led to a government investigation, and essentially the nurses were blamed and thrown under the bus in that. And then the whole thing quieted. So I knew this went on. And I think anyone who's been in hospital around elderly people kind of knows there's an unspoken euthanasia program in the country. The extent to which it went on, the brazenness, and the way it was used to jig the numbers in 2020 to create this death spike, which is what I would contend, based on the data and a lot of different points and the anecdotes from people, that it's used to create this death spike precisely because people don't have such easy access. So a lot of the accounts in the books are people who are banging on the doors of the ward and not allowed in, and that's how they can get away with this. Because I think everyone knows who's been in hospital, had a loved one in, visitors play an essential part in the care. Hospitals can be wonderful, doctors and nurses can be wonderful, they can be deeply inefficient. And they can do things like forget medications from one shift to the next and all sorts of things, food, drink, all these things. And it's completely blooming obvious at the outbreak of, well, I was about to say the outbreak of the pandemic. I should say the outbreak of the lockdowns, really. If you remove that, you're removing a massive level of oversight of the care people are getting in care homes, nursing homes, hospitals. And that's obviously going to lead to a depreciating quality of care in there. And the ability, combined with the fear that's going around of this killer virus from China, and the perception that, well, anyone who gets that is a goner anyway, so you might as well just put them on the end of life pathways.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, Jacqui, that if we go back in time to March to May of 2020, and that really was, we talked about previously the midazolam murders. This is when they basically contrived the spike to make sure people were good and proper scared, and were just crying out for the vaccine. But I mean, I don't know if ever in our history we've ever lived through such a murderous episode as those 3 or 4 months back in 2020, when they didn't have the vaccine, but they wanted the fear and the deaths, and that's what happened then. I mean, it was particularly brutal, wasn't it, when we look back?
Yeah, I mean, there's a section in the first documentary I made. It's called A Good Death. I produced that with Iconic Media. And there's the section in there that we call Pushing Up the Numbers, which focused specifically on that spike in April A lot of things happened in April 2020. We saw Matt Hancock, who was the health secretary then, ordering extra amounts of midazolam, buying it in from France, 22,000 extra doses of midazolam brought in, and it was 2 years' supply. They used it in 9 months. And then we have him talking in Parliament to Dr. Luke Evans MP about this very issue, how they're all prepared, you know, they've got all the medications now in place so people could have a good death. That's one of the places, one of the reasons I called the film a good death, even though I'd heard that euphemism before. That was a good death, ? Even though our book doesn't have a question mark, that one did, because, you know, people describe euthanasia as a good death where it's anything but. So so that spike occurred in April 2020, and in the care homes and in people thought, oh, it's, you know, a lot of people thought they're all dying of COVID, whereas, you know, most of us realise now that COVID wasn't a killer virus and maybe didn't even exist, depending on your viewpoint. But it definitely wasn't anything to do with any kind of virus. And we later found out through a lot of other studies. There's one in particular by Wilson Tsai, who looked into it and found out that these deaths were indeed iatrogenic death by overdose. At least 55,000. That's the smallest amount, and probably it goes into the hundreds of thousands. I mean, there'll be a lot of people who've been killed who don't have any families, you know, and we don't ever hear about, you know, what happened to them.
Yeah, it is actually, you know, Richard, further to what Jacqui just said, I feel really sorry for people who would have had relatives in care homes and elderly, and just by definition, if you're in a care home, you know, you're probably not in the fittest state, and you're probably even more vulnerable than in a hospital. But then they were turned away; they weren't allowed to come in. It was too dangerous because of the imaginary killer virus, and so, you know, again, a murderous act by those running the care homes. How can people in charge of care homes be so cruel?
Well, I think some of them did protest it. I think others had a financial incentive to take COVID patients in. That's what comes across from testimonies in the book. And Amnesty actually issued a report in August of 2020, and they kind of figured out what was going on. They called it as if expendable, and they were referring to Britain's elderly, talking about how as soon as the virus was even imagined to be on its way, 25,000 elderly people were evicted from hospital. Now, they're not there for a day out. Okay, they're there because there's something wrong with them and need to be in hospital. So they're booted out, sent to care homes here and everywhere. Their false teeth and glasses are sent to different care homes. Total chaos. Doctors won't go in because they're afraid of the virus now. You're not having the normal people going in doing chiropodry and hairdressing and all these people to provide oversight. And to talk about callousness, there's a lot of ways you could look at that, a lot of psychological experiments. I think one thing that massively sets this off is when people are afraid, and people became terrified of the killer virus from China, and you will do callous things. You will start to look at a whole class in society as being expendable at that moment, even though we were told, like I remember watching these graphs on the news, and apparently if you're all locked down for 2 weeks, there are these 2 lines and they won't intersect, and that will mean all the elderly will survive. And it was the complete opposite of that. The actions very obviously killed off the elderly. Just, you could predict that, like, right from the get-go.
Yeah. Well,
but I think it's fear to a great extent.
Yeah. I mean, and then obviously, you know, for the book, you interviewed then the next of kin, obviously, of those who had been murdered during this period. What period in time are we talking about? Is it 2020, 21, 22? What's the timelines on this one in terms of the people you talked to?
The majority of the deaths occurred between 2020 and 2022, peaking in 2021, I would say.
Yeah.
We've got one story in the book which was prior to COVID coming in 2018, because obviously this has been going on a long time, but it was just really ramped up in 2020. As soon as Hancock brought in NG163, which was a COVID protocol, a nice guideline, NG163, which was identical to the Liverpool care pathway, which had been abolished in 2014, so because it had been described as inhumane, they snuck it back in. I mean, Hancock actually put it before a panel of professors and doctors to get it approved, but he didn't get it approved. They told him, no, you can't use that because it's going to kill people.
Yeah.
And they wrote that up in the British Medical Journal, which is still online if you want to look at it, authored by Dr. Sam Ahmadzi, who's one of the top palliative care specialists in the world. He wrote this up. It was signed by the other doctors, and Hancock said thanks for that and implemented it anyway. So, you know, he didn't really want he wanted them to say, yes, it's a great idea, and they didn't say that. So he just thought, well, I'll do it anyway. The other thing, I actually saw Matt Hancock in court over another issue, not me personally, I'd gone to support a friend, and he actually denied in court that he'd ever heard the word midazolam, even though we've got him on film on April the 17th, 2020, talking to Luke Evans, using the word himself, midazolam. And then in court in June 23, I think it was, he's saying he's never heard of it until this man had chased him down the street shouting, midazolam, Matt, you know, you've killed lots of people.
Yeah.
This was the guy who was in court. Matt Hancock said that the guy had tried to push him down an escalator on the underground, which was totally untrue. We'll watch the video in court. Saw that not happen at all, and he still got done for it. So, so Matt Hancock had put this in place, and that's really when it was ramped up, because then all the doctors and nurses, and a lot of them who have been approached are even saying now, we were following protocol. That was the government protocol. We had to follow it. Yeah. And this is how they're going to get away with it as well, because they'll just say, that was what the government told us to do at the time, you know. And if anyone's going to be thrown under the bus, it will be the nurses, because in law, it's the person who's actually administered the poison or the drug or the gunshot or the stabbing or whatever, the person who uses the weapon against the victim, they're the ones who are going to be done for it, not the person who told them to do it. So the government have removed themselves quite nicely. The doctors have removed themselves quite nicely. So if anyone gets done for it at all, it will be the ones who administered the drugs.
It sort of reminds me, Richard, of that old expression, we were only following orders. You know, I seem to remember that from another point in history where people, you know, we were just doing what we were told. You can't come at us. We were following as Jacqui said, we were following the protocol. So, I mean, it's so disingenuous, but at the same time, it's hard to see a legal way through that.
There are people submitting to the book who see themselves as being in it for the long term, and see that a lot of things that come out decades later. And I think this is one of those things. So yeah, I do notice a slow turning. I mean, the difference between living in 2020, 2021 and 2023, 24 is huge, right? In terms of no one believed in it anymore. Like the supposed virus hasn't gone anywhere. Yeah, okay, people say they mutated, but everyone's going out and being normal, and no one cares whether you got the thing or not anymore, the shot, and the belief fell away. And I think I see that even, like, my connection to Jacqui comes from writing a report on COVID back in 2023. And at the time, I was a little disheartened that it didn't go further, because I was talking about things like the COVID being iatrogenic, doctor-induced, rather than viral-induced, being responsible for the deaths. And that seemed a bit too radical in 2023, but I'm noticing there's a lot more reception to that now than there was then. So I do see, living in the moment is always disheartening. Things are always bad in the moment, but over time, you do notice this shit.
You're right, Ashley. You know, but it is also the thing about time as well. You know, time has moved. I mean, time has moved on from 2020, 21, 22, which is why I think the work that you're doing is actually really important, because whilst time moves on and other people can get on with their lives, well, some people don't have that. I mean, obviously the people that were killed, they don't have that luxury, and their relatives have to live with the pain. Jacqui, question, tell me about the 2018 one, because I'm curious about that, and we'll get into some of the other ones as well, but that was a pre-COVID euthanasia.
Yeah, that story is by a lady called Lorraine Norton, who's she's on X. You can follow her there, and she talks a lot about the story, and it was her mother who was killed in hospital. It's a very, very long, drawn-out, convoluted story. It's in the book, so if people want to read it. And Richard is actually doing some audio interviews separately And you've interviewed Lorraine, haven't you, for that?
Yeah, that's going to be coming out this week or next. Yeah.
So you probably remember the story better than I.
Yeah, so was that Richard? Was that like a Liverpool?
Yeah, it's always gone on, right? I don't think it ever went away. It just spiked during the conditions in March of 2020, set it up for a massive spike, and it goes on afterwards. Actually, a lot of stories report from 2021 onwards, people being treated very differently depending on whether they'd had the thing or not. I don't know if we can talk about the thing. You're not meant to talk about and say the word, but we can talk about this. Yeah, just for the algorithm censorships, right? But like people would take their loved ones to hospital, and if they hadn't been vaccinated, there was a definite perception that, oh, well, and then almost like the ideology of the vaccine being so strong, there was almost a want to be punitive at that point and blame them, and then, well, they're not going to survive, are they? How could they? And that the absence of the vaccine determining then the outcome. Or another contributor writes about how her father went in with heart trouble in 2023, and there was a complete refusal to acknowledge it as being heart trouble, and it was an emphasis on it's the lungs, it's the lungs, it's the lungs. He died eventually, and his daughter speculated that they wanted to keep it away from heart because of the vaccine connection. So they were downplaying heart. Now, it's a little bit of speculation there. I don't think unreasonable to see how it went on afterwards and how the choice to have a vaccine or not determined the kind of treatment you might be getting in hospital.
So the people who chose Jacqui to have the vaccine, which, let's face it, was the majority of people. Like, you know, I know some of us didn't, but a lot of people took the TV as gospel. They listened to their doctors, whatever, and they trusted that this treatment was going to be, you know, helpful to them. And so it is actually ultimately, it's the ultimate medical betrayal, isn't it? To give something, to give people stuff that's ultimately, you know, going to kill them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been devastating for a lot of people who are now waking up to the fact that if they're not ill yet, that they might be in the near future. And everyone around them dropping like flies. It must be absolutely terrifying. I'm lucky to say I move in circles where most of the people I know have never had it, so would never have it. So I don't know. But obviously, I know the majority. Well, we're told the majority probably have, but I think it's a lot less than we've actually been told, because they're always trying to. Yeah, I'm going to say it's like 30% of people had it, and they're telling you it's 90, you know, and no way is it 90, because just I know a lot of people, and I know I move in these kind of circles with people generally, but I also meet other people. I meet, you know, people all the time when I'm out and about, and a lot of your average man in the street didn't go for it either, because they didn't trust it. You know, they said it's new, I don't want it, and whole communities, you know, didn't take it. So it's like, because they don't trust the government, they don't trust they didn't trust the science, which obviously was not science.
No, yeah.
So, yeah, no, it's a big betrayal.
May I come in on that? It is less. I'm a little bit more conservative than Jacqui. Like, it's quite a nice working relationship that we do have slightly different perspectives on the world. So I'm going to say, like the Professor Norman Fenton of he was a professor of statistics at Queen Mary's. Yeah. So he did a statistical analysis of this, and he got it to be about, now this is from memory, he thought about 25% of people didn't have it. Okay, which is considerably more that weren't having it than the official figures. And he demonstrates in a very intelligent mathematical way how if you overestimate the number of people who had it, it's a statistical trick where you make it look more effective. Okay, and with pen and paper, I can explain that in about 10 minutes. Right, but you can read Professor Fenton on that, and it's really interesting. But that complaint was, he made a complaint to the UK statistics regulator, which was upheld on that point, that the statistics, what's it called, the government statistical body had overestimated the ONS, half course, sorry, had overestimated the number of people who were vaccinated, and that was upheld.
Oh, no. Well, I mean, I would go along with what Norman says. He's a very intelligent guy who understands statistics and stuff. And by the way, I don't believe anything the ONS says on any front, let alone this. But yeah, I mean, you're both probably right that what we were told was just part of a sales job. Everyone's getting it. So what's wrong with you? Why are you not getting it? And yeah, I mean, that was basically the big propaganda line.
And they like to do the intermittent scarcity thing as well, don't they? Oh, quick, it's running out, you know.
Yeah.
Only the last few bargain jabs left, you know, get down to your...
But Can either of you believe that people still, I mean, there are some people, there's maybe not many, but there's some people who must be on their 15th booster, and I'm just wondering what scale of mental damage have they had that they're, because they think it's normal. It's like getting getting a flu vaccine, not a great idea in my personal opinion, but but they treat it like that, especially elderly people. They seem to think, yeah, I just got my latest COVID booster.
Well, I've spoken to some elderly people about that. My neighbour, and I've got her to read the light paper, and she listens to me, rolling her eyes at everything I say. But and she's almost 80. But she said to me last September, "Oh, I'm not going to get any more jabs." I think she'd had quite a few by then, 5 or 6, and she's like, "That's it." And she hasn't been feeling great. And then a couple of weeks later, she said to me, "Oh, you're going to love this." And I said, "Oh, what am I going to love?" And she said, "I went and got the flu jab, and now I feel really ill." And I'm like, "Why am I going to love that?" And she said, "Because obviously, you're right." And I'm like, "Well, I don't love being right when it means that somebody's ill. Do you know what I mean?"
Of course.
And so I said, "Well, I thought you weren't going to do it." And she said, "Oh," I said, "So what made you decide?" And she went, "I don't know really. I just thought, oh, everyone else is doing it. The doctor said it's a good idea." She's probably thinking, who am I going to listen to? My doctor and all my friends or my crazy tinfoil hat wearing neighbour, And she went and got it. And that she's not been well for the last couple of years. She was as fit as a flea before she started having the jabs. My other neighbour, elderly man, he was forced, he believes he was coerced, shall we say, by his GP into having the jabs. He said he didn't want them, and his GP told them they were compulsory for people of his age. He's in his 70s, so he's not even. He now looks. I mean, he's like 75. He looks 150, and bless him. And he's almost blind. He's had a brain tumor, 2 brain operations, several strokes. And I said, "Do you think it's to do with those jabs?" And he said, "I don't know, maybe." But he said, "I wouldn't have had them if I didn't think I had to have them." So he was kind of, I wonder how many people. Then you had the doctors going around to people's houses. I heard of a story in Northern Ireland, doctors just turning up at people's houses. And then the elderly people didn't want the jabs, but they felt it was a bit rude because the doctor had gone out of his way and come all the way to the house, and it would be a little bit rude of them to decline it. So they just went along with it thinking, well, the doctor knows what he's doing. And did he? Did the doctor know? Did the doctors know what they were doing?
No, I don't think they did. I think what they did know was that, however, they did get a financial payment, didn't they, for each jab that they gave. And I worked out my local GP, who happily I haven't seen in years. But anyway, he's got about my local GP surgery. They've got about I think it's 10,000 people, on their books. And I mean, that's a nice little profit. That's a nice little earner if you can manage to get those to come along and take the shots. And I reckon
there was the doctor in Wales. There was a news story, didn't he? A whole weekend jabbing, made about 60 grand or something. It's like,
yeah.
Oh, what was he thinking? He must have been sticking 5 in at a time in people's arms.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
But I know. I mean, the thing is, my confidence in GPs vanished. Now, maybe Jacqui, you didn't. You may have been. I think you probably were ahead of me in that. But I would have up until 2020 had some vague respect for GPs and what they think and what they analysed and what they said. That went to zero. I can tell you, I went to zero and stayed at zero, and it's not going back up above zero. But all people are very different. So the people you've been talking to, then the different stories that you've encapsulated, talk our viewers through a couple of those. You do one, Jacqui. You do one, Richard. Go first, Jacqui. Talk about one of the whichever one you think.
Here's an absolutely horrendous one. This one is anonymous. There's a couple of stories in the book that are anonymous, but most have got people's real names attached to them.
Yeah.
And it's this woman whose husband went in hospital with a slight chest infection. He was young, in his 50s. And over a period of, I think, 10 days, they plied him with loads of drugs, huge amounts of midazolam, huge amounts of morphine. But he was a big man, and he was surviving all this. And he tried to escape from the place several times, but they tied him down, restrained him, and it was absolutely awful. and in the end, they killed him. And then she was horrified and asked. She got a lawyer involved immediately, and the police. The police didn't want to know. Obviously, this was in November 21, and and she got the lawyer to ask the hospital could they do a post-mortem, because she wanted to find out what happened, because she hadn't seen his medical records at that point. And they said they couldn't do a post-mortem, and the reason they couldn't do the post-mortem is because all his organs had been removed for donation. And this woman had no idea that the law had been changed in May 2020, and a lot of people, I spoke to a woman the other day who was my age, who had no idea about this law change. I said, you realise you're an organ donor? And she said, no, I haven't signed up for it. And I said, no, now you're an organ donor if you don't opt out. So everyone who hasn't opted out, and even if you have opted out, it's debatable whether they'll still come in and harvest them at some point, And the other thing about organ donation as well is that if you look on your driving license, if there's a number 115 on the back in the bottom left-hand corner, that means you're an organ donor. And even if you've opted out via the NHS website, but you've got 115 on the back of your driving license, I think that can override it. Say you say you were in a car crash, and say you were a young person in a car crash, that's like very good opportunity to harvest organs. And if you've got 115 on your driving license, that means you're an organ donor. They'll look at that before they go and look on the NHS website. So
we should just make everyone watching this aware of that. And so maybe you want to all take an opportunity when we're finished, go and check your driving license to see. Actually, as a side to that, Jacqui, I was writing something about Canada. Their MAID, which is essentially their euthanasia scheme. And but it's more to do with the organ harvesting as well that's been going on over there. It's staggering that Canada is I think it's now the epicenter of organ harvesting from people who have been. So in a way, this is all linked, isn't it? It's
well, like that's a strange thing, because I was going to mention that tonight as well, because I'm making another film, so this will be the fourth documentary. So I did A Good Death, then I did Playing God, then I did Unseen. This will be the fourth one. It's called The Gift of Life ? I think, and it's about organ donation, organ harvesting, and the myth that is brain death, basically. So we're looking into all that. And then today it pops up on social media about MAID being linked to organ harvesting. And because I'd already done a post about, I was wondering if it's somehow linked, to these forced these murders in hospitals and care homes, and organ harvesting. But everyone's saying no, because most of the people that are euthanized are elderly, and it's like, well, their classification of elderly over 50 or over 60, that's not elderly. Your organs are, in most people, they're going to be in fine shape, and they're going to be useful for transplantation and worth a lot of money. And the other point that I wanted to make about this involuntary euthanasia, this murder that's been going on, it's not just elderly people. In the book, there are a series of people talking about their sons who were killed, and their husbands and wives. It's not just your 90-year-old mum or dad. There's a lot of as well. So yes, there's definitely a link. And then you start looking at it in the UK. It's like, is that what's going on here as well? So it's a horrible thought if it is all linked, but I think there's a big chance that it is.
Well, I think the older I live, Jacqui, the more certain I am there are no such things as coincidences. There are no coincidences, Richard, in my opinion anyway. But Richard, perhaps could you talk us through another one of the stories to give everyone?
Sure. Well, funnily enough, on the theme of there not being such things as coincidences, I'll talk about the Jan, the lady I interviewed, the first interview that went out. So her father went into hospital with what seemed to be chest pain, and it seemed to be heart related. It's the lady I mentioned whose father, they wouldn't accept it was his heart, they insisted it was his lungs. Okay. And the day I was doing the interview, a friend of mine a few days before had been taken into hospital with serious breathing difficulties, and he was really ill. And I have to say the hospital were excellent from beginning to end, just absolutely excellent, attentive, caring. And I was sat there as the doctor, the consultant, was telling the nurse, okay, we're going to lower his oxygen levels from 5 to 4 now, but if it goes beneath 93 on the monitor, we need to bring it back up. And there was this incredible care and precision. And I could see how much he was really struggling with not being able to get the same level of oxygen in. Like, he managed to take a shower one day, and the next day he's wiped out. So with that, no such thing as coincidence. I do the interview in the evening, and Jan, this lady is telling me about how her father's oxygen levels were allowed to drop down into the 70s and remain there. And this is excruciating. And it goes on. And then they bring them back up, but they would not give him the level of oxygen he needed. They just wouldn't do it. And in part, that was incompetence on the part of the staff being poorly trained. And in another part, on the level of consultants, she recognized that they had made a decision that he was end of life and nothing was going to shake them from that now. And she recalls being at home and thinking of how, hang on, if they're not going to want to be wrong now they've made this decision, if he recovers, that's going to mean they were wrong and they'd put someone who wasn't going to die on an end of life program. And I think this is a massive factor, that when you go on that program, very, very hard to get off, because you're going to, if you come off that, like, how bad a mistake is that for a consultant to have made, that they put someone on end of life that recovered? So she just witnessed this absolute determination to do nothing to help her father, but put him on drugs and sedate him until he died, which is ultimately what happened.
And he was actually a doctor as well.
He was,
the victim was
really?
a doctor, and he was extremely, that photo we've got on the cover of him, that was him, elderly, and he looks extremely young and fit and healthy, you know. He doesn't look like an elderly gentleman at all. In fact, where is he in the picture there? I think he's right on the bottom row. You can't see him. We'd need to, there he is.
Yeah.
On the very bottom right. Yeah. So I think he was about 82. Was he 82 when they killed him? But that wasn't a very old.
He's in his 80s, yeah.
Yeah, he's just looked incredibly young for his age, and apart from these chest pains, had been pretty fit and healthy and working until you know, not that long previously. And when you look at all these people in those pictures, you know, all those people had lives, you know, really lives, some of them, and they're not just. And you see the young guy over there on the left, you know, he was only 48 when he was killed in a mental health facility. Yeah, there. And you can see a lot of them aren't elderly people, but even if they are, you know, he's young as well. Yeah, that's Michelle Roberts' brother, and she's the first story in the book, actually. Yeah, and that lady above, 2 pictures above, she's only 55. So, you know, they're not all elderly people. So yeah, it is heartbreaking. There was something I wanted to mention. I did a post about it the other day, and it is on the same subject. There's this drug called flumazenil, and it's an antidote to a benzodiazepine overdose. So midazolam is a benzodiazepine. It's a sedative. It's not painkiller. Sometimes people might be given too much of it, and it's like, oh no, they're going to die. We've given them too much. Where's the antidote? So the antidote, which is always to hand when you're giving midazolam, flumazenil, is given, and then the patient is brought back. They recover. But during this period from 2020, there was no flumazenil available. Not one single person that I've spoken to said their loved one was given that. And I was watching, and this is linked, I was watching the Netflix series about Dennis Nielsen, the serial killer. And in 2 of his murders that he did, he actually killed the person and then resuscitated them. And in one case, he killed the guy again. So the poor guy was murdered twice. But in the second case, he resuscitated the guy and let him go. And I was thinking, what is the difference between notorious serial killer Dennis Nielsen and the doctors and nurses that administered these drugs? Well, the difference is Dennis Nielsen brought a couple of them back.
Well,
these doctors and nurses did not use the antidote. I have not heard one single case of flumazenil being used when they realized they'd overdosed. So what does that say to you?
But it's kind of the antidote to a midazolam overdose or whatever. So, I didn't know that, Jacqui. Yeah, it's fascinating.
You can look it up. It's FLU, MAZENIL, flumazenil, and it's specifically for a benzodiazepine overdose. It's that. So pretty shocking. And it's funny how I kind of make all these links, but I was just randomly watching that thing thinking, wow, that is terrible. They brought them back. And I thought, well, for the guy who survived, you know, it wasn't so bad. But I mean, obviously something terribly wrong with that man's mind. But then I'm thinking, what's in the minds of the people who are murdering people and not giving them the antidote when
well, that's a good question. Well, Richard, what's in their mind?
I have to think I mean, I'm not the most conspiratorial person on any level, right? So compared to some of the people I would have spoken to in local COVID groups here and all sorts, so I tend to look for how do people who are intending to some level to do good come and convince themselves that this is the right way to go. And I do think a lot of it comes down to being convinced about this dangerous, deadly virus that's going around. Although with that being said, I do think that there are a percentage of people who are drawn to professions where you have a lot of power over another person, where it really brings the shadow out of them. It really brings that psychopathic side out of a person. It might draw people in the same way. I mean, you see it everywhere, don't you? You see like how many spiritual teachers are exposed as being narcissistic abusers, how many of all sorts of caring professions. You get those dark triad traits. So I think it's a combination of those things. And at some level, you get people who are just consciously aware of what they're doing and are just, you know, essentially gangsters of the World Economic Forum or something.
I also think that a lot of people, especially the younger people, and quite possibly the paramedics that killed my dad, I think that they genuinely are trained and that they genuinely believe that they're helping, and they're putting these sad old people who are going to die soon anyway, just out of their misery. I think a lot of them think they're doing mercy killings, but then you do get the psychopaths. Yeah. I've heard doctors and nurses talking about people. I've heard carers being despicably disrespectful about their residents behind their back. You know, I spoke to a carer recently, well, in passing. I didn't know her, but as soon as she said she worked in a care home, I was interested. And so that must be a really nice job. You know, didn't say anything about what I'd been looking into or anything. She didn't know my job. And she said, no, it's not really. And she said, these old people, she said, they can't do anything for themselves. And I said, well, that's probably why they're in a care home. They need a bit of help, you know. And she said, no, but they're just useless. They just sit around all day. They don't do anything. They can't even get dressed. They can't even go to the toilet on their own. She said, they're just living too long, these people. She said, people are living too long. And I was thinking, bloody hell, I hope I don't end up in her care home when I'm 80 years old, you know. And you can imagine how you would be treated.
Think about how callous you could become, right? If you're working in an environment where you're seeing death time after time after time, for a certain mindset, it's not that hard to think how someone could see this as a logistical problem, that they're going to die anyway, and we need that bed empty. Okay, and that callousness could slip in, which is why you need these things to be tightly regulated to act against that psychological impulse, which a lot of people who in a different profession, if they were, you know, delivery drivers or accountants or something, they might not go into that kind of state of mind. But being surrounded by death, it could make a person of a certain mindset callous. So you need it to be pushed against, whereas we have systems that fully encourage it.
Yeah, and there has been a theory as well that over the COVID era, I don't like saying that, during the faux pandemic, that people were brought in, specifically mercenaries were brought in to do this job, because most of our normal nurses that you meet every day in hospital are lovely. They wouldn't be able to kill people. They're not murderers. They would say, no, I'm not going to do that. I want to help the person heal. But there was this, nearly everyone I've spoken to talks about these nurses, sadistic, sneering, nasty, cruel. All these words come up over and over again. Smirking, we get quite a lot as well, the way they smirk. Some of them don't speak, lack of eye contact. Who are these people? These aren't nurses as I know them. So a lot of people have reckoned that they were brought in specially because in some cases, when the families have tried to track down specific nurses, they're nowhere to be found. Some of these nurses didn't have name badges. They didn't have registration numbers. They couldn't be found afterwards. Who were they? Were they brought in specifically to do that job?
Maybe they were related to the TikTok dancing nurses, which were apparently an important part of healthcare at that time as well, Jacqui, you know?
Well, I wrote a lot of articles about the TikTok dancing nurses.
Yeah.
The more I looked into it, the more I realized they weren't nurses. Either I think some of the videos are actors and performers because they're way too good at dancing. Most nurses can't.
That's right.
Yeah. I couldn't dance like that, and I'm quite agile for an old bird. But so that, or if you look closely, a lot of it is AI. Especially, you know, these sort of sweeping vistas and filming nurses dancing on hospital rooftops, filmed by drones. It's like, no, that's not someone just doing it on their phone in a hospital corridor. But even the ones that were done in the hospital corridors were highly suspect. A lot of them had masks on all the time, so you couldn't identify them. The others just looked, very much like AI. And then you've got to ask, well, why were these videos put out? And the mainstream media didn't report on them for a long, long time. And when they did, it was only one or two little stories here and there. I think one in the Mail and one in the Guardian. But on social media, they were everywhere. So the question is, why were they pushing those stories? I mean, were they wanting people to suddenly think that the hospitals were empty and the nurses had all this time? Because before, they were pushing the fact that it was a war zone, in every hospital in Britain, and they were snowed under and battling every day, And the next thing they're telling you, maybe it's just to keep people in a state of confusion and fear, because that people who are confused and fearful are easier to manipulate, easier to control, because they're looking for help all the time. So,
well, Richard, that must have been also for the people that you spoke to. I mean, and the situations that they went through with their relatives. I mean, things like Jacqui's talking about, the fear that they must have, and the concern, the stress, the anxiety, all of that. When your loved one's in hospital and things are not looking good, people become very vulnerable in those situations. Not just the person in the hospital, but the relatives as well. I mean, did you pick that up from the people that you spoke to? I mean, how did they feel about it?
A lot of them are figuring it out as it goes along. So I think there's the people at the start of this, some of them would have been quite aware of, like, let's say, a more conspiratorial view of the world. I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. They just have more cynicism about the government and all the rest. And some of them didn't. Some of them were completely trusting that the NHS is there to help you. But to some degree, they all figured it out a moment too late. So they're all going through this horror show. And I think what stays with me also, so there's two reasons why I felt it was important to be involved in the book. One is I want as many people as possible to know about the iatrogenic roots of COVID. There was a doctor-induced thing. Okay, so the next time the state comes along with its bag of wonders of lockdowns and masking and all the different ways they're going to ruin society, enough people say no. The other reason is on a purely human level. The story doesn't end at the point of death. Obviously, it's kind of the beginning, because then there's a legal process and there's meetings at the hospital, and these people are just told to jog on everywhere they go, and they go through corrupt processes in courts and everything. There is one lady in the book, Jacqui, you might know more, but who actually won a court case over the death of her father because the neglect was so obvious, where he'd just not been fed for so long they couldn't deny it. But for the vast overwhelming majority, it is a case of nobody cares. The hospital doesn't care, the police don't care, the coroner's office don't care, and it's like saying that their loved ones' lives were kind of worthless. It doesn't matter that they died, and that's the big kind of personal reason for me of being involved in this, is to say, hey, look, actually, it does matter, and people do want to hear about this, and it's important. Their lives are important.
Yeah. Well, that's right. They are. I mean, if you bring Jed, bring up the cover of the book again, there, please, because when I look at that, and you look and these and every face, behind every face, there's a real life human being, all the stuff that we all have in our lives, and it just callously, extinguished, Jacqui. It is quite horrific.
And people aren't aware of the ripple effect it has as well. It's not just these people's lives who have been destroyed. It's all their friends, all their family. Close family members cannot rest. They can't sleep. They're suffering from all kinds of illnesses and mental health problems, depression, anxiety, insomnia, and they just cannot rest. And also, the sad thing about people who are related to or friends of murder victims, they need justice, and
of course,
and until they get that, they can't even grieve. So that's the sad thing. All these relatives, all these families, and me included, we're all in a state of suspended. I don't know what it is, but it's like you can't move on. You can't grieve. You can't get over it. You can't. And that's something that's we all have in common, when it comes to this. And they say, I think a lot of people are saying that maybe once they get justice, then they'll be able to let it go, and be able to grieve maybe. But until then, they can't.
Yeah, but meanwhile, like the years pass by, Jacqui, and people are kept in that horrible, horrible limbo where you can't get kind of some sort of resolution or whatever. Because I mean, the title of the book is "Murdered by the State." So by definition, it's the state, which is the government, which is fundamentally in the epicenter of this, Jacqui.
Yeah, why hasn't the government sued us? They can't, because it's all true. Where's the NHS? I mean, at the start when we were putting the book together, most of the people writing the stories wanted to name the hospitals. They wanted to name each doctor, each nurse. They said, throw them under the bus. I don't care. I want, people should know that these people are murderers, and these hospitals are, are employing these murderers. But we kind of weighed it all up. I wondered if it would make the stories less believable, not having that kind of information. But we realised that it worked quite well without. And also, I was just concerned that if I was putting it out on my own, I would have done it. But because then it would only be me. But I didn't want the publishers. So 104 Publishing, that's Mark Atwood and Abby Wynne. It's their publishing company. I didn't want them to get into trouble, for using the actual names. So we decided not to. But I'm sure if anyone of those people any one of the relatives and the narrators wants to come in and be interviewed, I know they're all quite happy to mention doctors' names. They want the word to get out there, definitely.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, Richard, in every case of all the people you met, I mean, there's a clear trail there. There's a clear tragedy in every behind every image, and it has to lead back to the state.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I live on the Isle of Man, okay, and I interviewed a lady here who was the manageress of a care home, and had been for a good 20 years and been entrusted to look after some of the most vulnerable elderly people on our island. The government took over control of the care home in March of 2020 because they said COVID was in. 20 people subsequently died in the care home. that might not be the absolutely precise number given who died before and after she left, but there was this wave of death afterwards. Now, it was reported out to her by staff still there, and staff qualified to distribute drugs, that they weren't dying of COVID. They were being euthanized with midazolam. Okay, so I recorded an interview of that. We put it out. It got into the press here because it was so shocking. The police and the coroner's office just said it was nothing to investigate. So this manager who has been entrusted and deemed responsible enough to distribute drugs for 20 years is now not deemed competent to make a judgment that an overdose is given out. That's not worth investigating even. That's how oh no, they're COVID deaths. Coroner says they're COVID deaths, so we don't need to worry about it. Doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. Interesting. You live in the Isle of Man. I was last there in about 1973, Richard, and keep making promises. I have to return to Douglas to see what it looks like after all these years. But lovely. It was a lovely place, as my memories would have me believe.
The 70s were the real happening years there for the parties and the tourist trade. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's great. It was that my family went every year. That's where we went, to the Isle of Man, But Jacqui, just to kind of bring things together. So if people want to get the book then and read these stories, just tell us where they need to go and how they need to do it.
There's the link at the bottom of the screen there. So that's bit.ly/Murdered by the State. Go there and you can find the book in many different formats. So there's an ebook, there's PDF ebook, and there's actually I don't know if they've got a Kindle version, maybe, and also the audiobook, which is as you said, a whole different type of experience.
The audiobook sounds really, really interesting. Is that available at the same site, Jacqui?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
May I just interject about the book, please? So the PDF, the site links through to where you can get a paperback and the audiobook. The PDF is downloadable in return for a donation of any amount. Okay, so if people can't afford it, then I just want to take a look, then absolutely, please do go there and download it. We very much appreciate people buying the book. We very much appreciate donations, because I think, Jacqui, you say we could start 2 more books tomorrow, right? We could do volumes 2 and 3, no bother. And there's 101 things to do with this. This will go on for years. So we very much appreciate anyone's support. But if anyone is hard up, the book is available for a donation of any amount.
And also, if anyone's got their own story after listening to this and they want to get in touch with me, they can email me or they can get me on Twitter. So I'm Jacqui Deevoy1 on Twitter. If they want to email me, it's jacqui.deevoy@gmail.com. So yeah, I'm open to, and I've got a support group as well. We've got about 200 people in the support group, which I set up.
I remember that. Yeah, tell me about that.
That's still, people come and go. You know, I think probably 1,000 people have come and gone. Some stay. Some have been there since the start. Some come in, can't cope with it. You know, it's a bit too much, especially someone who's just lost someone. It's all a bit much. But we've actually got some real experts in the group now who know so much about the law surrounding this and all about the hospital protocols. And I mean, it's so good. If you need help or advice, it's a good group to join. But it can be a bit much sometimes, you know, if it's new.
Well, Jacqui, I mean, I know what you've been doing over the last several years with regard to this topic, and along with Richard there, I think it's really serious, important work, and it is good to help people and to hold the state accountable for what has gone on. And I think also with an eye to the future as well, because when you look at the enthusiasm that this government's trying to bring in their version of the Canadian made, the whole thing, it's a scary world. But we don't want to scare people completely. So suffice to say, folks, please give your support to Jacqui and to Richard. Go to the link, download, contribute if you can, support them. You know, we're not the BBC. We don't have 3.7 billion in our back pocket, but what we do have is good intentions. And I know that having known Jacqui so long and meeting yourself, Richard, you guys are on the side of the angels in this one. So you have my complete support. So look, thank you both very much for being here with me. For the first time in your case, Richard, for the nth time in your case, Jacqui. It's great to see you both. Thanks for that. I hope everyone's enjoyed this. And as I say, go hit the link and find out more. Get the book. Find out the horrors that some people have had inflicted upon them. But anyway, from Jacqui, from Richard, and myself, it's a good night. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye-bye.